That'll work. Okay, that'll work.
Okay.
Get ready.
Okay.
Ready. I'm gonna count you down. All right.
Hi, it's Jeff Redding from VidMag TV, and we're greatly honored to have David Thomas of Pere Ubu with us here today. David, welcome.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I want to start you off back around 1972, Rocket from the Tombs, mainly because in a little, right around a week from now, is the first anniversary of Steve's death. And you guys go way, way back. And I was hoping maybe you might reflect a little bit
On Steve? I'm not sure what I know to say about Steve. I mean, we worked together for a while. He was always a nice fellow. You know, I mean, he was always a nice fellow who I think tried too hard to be something that necessarily he wasn't. But I don't know much beyond that to say about him. I mean, I liked him.
Yeah, it was quite a tragedy.
Yes. Sure.
And everything. So. Okay, so we'll take a quantum leap up to around 1976.
Yikes, okay.
And Pere Ubu.
Yeah.
And would you tell us, because a lot of the people that we have watching the show really don't know a lot about Pere Ubu, so why don't you give us kind of like a quick capsule as to...
Well, number one, it was 1975, that's okay, because it was towards the end of the 70s. He said pedantically, in those days we were among a group of people in this town who were known as urban pioneers, and we were among a group of people who had moved back into the downtown area, had the same sort of idea at the same time, and we were the Pere Ubu was the folk music of the urban pioneers, and we were young, and we were living in a city that was despised. We were living in a city. It's always interesting. It always fascinated me and many others to. You know, you think of the Mayan and Incan cities and at what point the living city dies and how it becomes the jungle overgrown area. And we were living at that fascinating time in history where we were living at the time that a city was dying, that the people who lived there no longer understood the hopes and dreams of the builders, and they fled at night in fear to their campfires in the suburbs. And so we were understood that at that time we loved the despised thing. We were the only ones who wanted it. And for a few brief years, we owned downtown Cleveland by sheer squatters' rights. And we would go into the industrial areas of the flats, and among the steel mills and the mystery and the poetry and the geometry and the light and the color and the drama of it all moved us. And we sought ways of expressing the inexpressible. And that's how we got to be what we were doing, he said. There's never a short answer when you ask me the question.
The whole concept of Pere Ubu is basically built around this whole...
I know I'm not authorized.
My sister.
I'm going.
Thank you.
Bye. It's a good show.
Thank you. My sister. Thank you for coming.
So basically then the whole concept of Pere Ubu is trying to make something out of all this squalor.
No. The basic concept of Pere Ubu is that sound has a visual component, that music exists to express the inexpressible, that music is the language and the poetry of the human experience. It has nothing to do with squalor. We didn't see squalor. We saw industry in the ideal sense, and we saw wonderful visions. And these were the things we were expressing. We weren't industrial. We weren't concerned with the downside of forever.
How would you classify Pere Ubu for people?
Our tour manager, Mike Kelly, thank you. Sorry, I'm
all right. For people that insist on putting a classification thing, because you're not punk,
No.
and and as you said, you're not industrial, and you're not art rock, and you're not dance rock.
We create music that doesn't fit for the enjoyment of people who don't fit. I think is the way we've always. People say, well, "What do you do?" We say, "Why? Wait a minute. What do you?" People say, like this fellow here would say, "What do you do?" And we say, "We do the avant-garage." And people would say, "Well, what's the avant-garage?" And we'd say, "Par as in par, king as in king, par king." Thank you. And then you would say, well, what does par king mean? What does the avant-garage mean? And the non sequiturs would continue until one of us gave up, and I never
And you
gave
never
up.
give up, as we can tell, because here you are today.
Sure.
So why don't you tell us about like your last couple of projects, Cloudland and now the new album, are kind of a departure for Pere Ubu.
Every album that Pere Ubu does is a departure for Pere Ubu in style. These last two records, yes, we at the end of Tenement Year was a record that was very noisy, that had 8 or 9 kitchen sinks being knocked down the steps at any one particular time, and this is what we set out to do. The message of, as it were, the vision of the poetry, the voice of the Tenement Year required a vehicle that was as such. We got done with that. We understood that if we were to do this again, that we would parody ourselves, and that we really basically we kind of could do this stuff. So naturally, the first thing Ubu does is to attempt the exact opposite approach. You know, to go in the opposite way, which was to be very, very strict with ourselves and to be very, very direct. We had an expression motto during Cloudland. Self-expression is evil. We had this in the dressing room. We got done with Cloudland. We decided, well, maybe we better loosen up a bit. You know, so it continues. So this record, we wanted to use the poetry of emotion to accomplish a few things. And the poetry of emotion really requires a very direct delivery and a very no-nonsense, naked, as it were, the heart is a crazy husband sort of approach. So I think that's it. I mean, that's the vehicle. Next album, who knows? I don't know.
Acoustics.
Yeah.
Pere Ubu uses acoustics on this album.
Yeah, shock horror. Yeah.
What was the
Well, the impetus behind it was that Jimmy came along with this beautiful acoustic piece that was just sublime, and rather than electrify it and sort of cheapen it in some ways or diffuse it, we thought, you know, well, it was obvious that the only thing that we really could honestly do was just go ahead and deliver it without worrying about what we're supposed to and supposed not to do.
And speaking of supposed and supposed not to do,
Yeah.
many
Now
people
what?
would consider Pere Ubu as being practically a totally and completely uncoverable band, and yet 2 different groups
At least.
have done Final Solution.
2 main groups, yeah.
Right, Peter Murphy and Living Colour most
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
How does that strike you that something like that would happen for you with the whole concept of what you see
Well,
would be?
I think it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick. I think of the number of songs that can be covered of ours, those are, you know, some of the similar ones. I haven't heard the Living Colour one. I went out and bought a copy when it came out on a single in England, but I haven't had the courage to listen to it yet. People have told me.
Actually, it's very good.
That's what I see. Everybody's told me that it's very good. So now when I get back home, I'm going to listen to it.
Except there is also-
What? Do they pronounce? See, I always go on one criteria. Do they pronounce the words so you can
See,
understand?
that's what
them?
I was just going to say. When I saw you at the Agora the last time,
Yeah.
when you said that
So they
everybody
do.
has blown it by saying, but you can understand the words. Yes, you can hear
Oh,
them.
dear.
You
That's
can
bad.
understand them.
Okay.
But see, that's another interesting concept also about Pere Ubu, is that there are songs that are considered as like classic songs. There's Lonesome Cowboy Dave, and there's the Final Solution, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo,
Sure.
Sonic Reducer.
Yeah.
That also seems to be almost in contradiction to what the whole Pere Ubu concept has been over the years. That
Yeah,
they're
but
memorable. I mean, like,
Well, we do
Yes.
memorable
Actually.
stuff. You know, I mean, we don't sit there and think, well, how can we write a song that nobody's going to like, or that's going to be so obscure that nobody can get it? You know, we don't do that. You know, we do try try to manipulate the listener and lead them down the garden path and jump out at them with a scary mask or a romantic. I want to be like you are. I want to rewrite your name. I want to live in the heart of someone and ride the mystery train. Only you and I will know. I want to be like the moon. I want to roll through the harbor skies. I want to look down on your house, be the moon beam in your eyes. Only you and I will know. I think that's about all I have to say. Unless there's one last question.
There's one last
so
question.
Important.
And that is...
I have my snacks.
Yes. And that is the comparison from America to Europe. You guys are big in Europe. And yet in America, and Cleveland particularly, you know, the hometown people and everything, you know, and it's like you just...
I don't know. So what's the question?
How can you compare the two, and why do you feel like you're so much more popular or whatever
Well,
in
it
Europe?
all had to do with the historical thing, in that when we were in 1975, 1976, when we were starting here, everybody in on the overground, the mainstream rock establishment, you know, despised us and made fun of us and thought we were idiots, you know, and fine. But what was happening was that the journalists from the national rock, the equivalent of Rolling Stone in France and the equivalent of that in Italy or in Holland, these people were sending, and of course England, were sending journalists to Cleveland in 1976 to report on us. You know, where at that time, you know, here it was like, you know, you guys are idiots. You know, what are you doing? Why don't you, learn some cover songs and stuff, you know? And so obviously our sights immediately shifted to where people were saying, gee, you know, this is, you guys are, you know, this is something special, you know. So our attention just focused there, and we really haven't focused anywhere else until quite recently.
Has it changed? I mean, have you found more acceptance in the States now?
Yeah, it's beginning to change. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Cool.